So the first thing that we're going to do when we're doing this particular step is make sure that when we edit out the background, it's not done in a way that's permanent, so that we can go back and we can fix the things that we've done to it and refine them if need be. So what we're going to do is, to make life very simple, I don't want to confuse the matter too much. So what I'm going to show you is how to duplicate things and put them into folders. This will enable you to go through and focus solely on the job that we're doing, and we won't be touching any of the other files that we've got so far. So what I'd like you to do is come down to the layers bar. I want you to highlight everything, so just click on one and then hold shift and go up to the very top. I want you to right click and say duplicate layers. Don't worry about trying to rename it, because seeing as there's so many layers, it's not going to enable you to do that. And we're going to click on OK. From this point here, we're going to merge every single one of these to get layers that we've just created. So you have to make sure you're only doing the ones that we've just created. We're going to merge them together so that they're one file. This means we can go through and edit out the background and know that we're not playing with the other layers that we've already done. So what you're going to do, you're going to right click and you're going to come down to this section which says merge layers. So once you've done that, you'll notice it'll come through and it's going to call it a generic name. We're going to double click on that and we're going to call that merged, so that we know exactly which one we're dealing with. Now, to further make sure that we don't mess with these other layers, what I'm going to do, I'm going to create, generally we've been creating layers so far. So what we're going to do now is create a folder. Now the folder is going to hold all the layers. It's exactly the same as the layer technique. It works on the hierarchy. Wherever it is on this scale is where it sits. So I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call this one original. Original, close enough. And drag that one down so that it's underneath the one that we've just done. And I want to grab all of these files that we have here underneath and drag them and drop them. Oh, sorry. It's not going to allow me to do that. Now, the reason why it's not going to allow me to do it in this particular case is because I have selected the background layer as well. Now, we can't edit a background layer because it's put into a lock mode. So what I want you to do for this, we're going to untick the lock mode, and it's going to convert that background layer now into a normal layer as everything else. You have to be careful though, because this layer is no longer locked, so you can accidentally make adjustments to it. So we're going to redo that. We're going to highlight them all. We're going to drag them up and drop them into that original folder. We're going to close the arrow so that we've got a very clean layers menu here. I'm going to click on the little eyeball so that layer is hidden. We haven't got rid of it. It's just hiding for the moment. Now, with this layer here, the one that we've just created, which is called merged, we're going to go through and we're going to make a mask this time as well. Now, in this case, the mask is going to sort of appear like it's a different thing to last time, merely because of the way that we were using masks before. In this case, now that this image here has nothing behind it, when we edit it, we were going to have a transparent background, so there'll be nothing behind the image. So we're going to come down, we're going to click on the mask tool, and just like last time, we're going to pull out our brush tool so that you can either come over to the brush tool here, or you can push B, which is a shortcut. I'm going to choose a fairly hard brush to begin with, because I want to make sure I know where I'm painting on this one. And I'm going to just come along and very, very roughly chop out around here to give you an idea of what I'm talking about with the transparent background. What happens when you are dealing with Photoshop when you don't have any information in the photograph? Behind it will become the the square pattern that you see on this image. That image represents a transparent background where there's no information. Again, that will pop up in varying degrees depending on the opacity of the image that you have. So if you have this as a, say, 80%, you're going to see some of the image and some of the background. But seeing as we're working at 100%, we're going to see all of it. Now, when you're doing this kind of work, you need to be patient, because cutting things out which are, fur or hair or anything like that is about one of the hardest things to work with. I could have shown you on something simpler. I do have another video. I'll put a link to that just under here, which is about deep etching. And it's basically a short version on how we're going to cut this out. So if you're not overly interested in having to learn how to do fur, you can just skip this step and go straight to the other one and then jump back to this video. So what we're going to do, I'm going to zoom in. So I'm holding Command and pushing the plus button for the people on Mac, and for people on PC, I'm pretty sure it's Control and the plus button. And I'm going to zoom in all the way. I'm going to bring up my brush tool again. I'm going to make sure that I have the mask selected. But in this case, I'm going to go through, I'm going to decrease the size of my brush quite substantially, and I'm going to decrease the hardness to about 28% or whatever is sort of appropriate. Now in this case, I'm going to come through and I'm going to feather this with my brush around the fur where the fur goes. Now in this case, you need to come back and get rid of these other sections. If you hold down the spacebar button, it will enable you to scroll the screen. So again, we're going to come in and we're going to grab this fur, and we're going to be very, very quick with this, because if we tried to do this super specifically, one, it'd still result in a bad job, and two, it would take forever. Fur and things like this with this type of background are very difficult to make look realistic the first time round. You have to do lots and lots of individual layers. I'm not going to show you all of the steps on how to do that, but I am going to show you a few shortcuts which, depending on how much time you're looking to use and how good you want the finished product to be, can be very handy. Again, they're one of those things that you have to be prepared to spend the time and do it properly. So if you are following along with this, I'm just going to try and speed through this a little bit quicker so that it doesn't take forever. For those of you that are wondering how I'm doing this so quickly, I'm not using a mouse. If you're interested, have a look at one of the little tablet interactive display things. I've got a Wacom Cintiq, so it's basically an interactive screen. They do make life a lot easier for this type of work. So now you can see we have all of this information and we've cut out the background. It doesn't look particularly good. What I want to show you is a trick to make sure that what you're doing ends up looking somewhat half decent before you take the next step. So we're going to create another layer. I'm going to call this one, we'll call this one black. I'm going to drag it underneath the layer that we've just made, and I'm going to come back up to over here where we have our paint bucket tool. I'm going to choose the color black, and I'm going to paint my background. Now you'll be able to see all the areas that you've missed. So you're going to want to go back to your mask, bring out your brush tool, and go through and get all the little bits that you've missed. Because it doesn't matter how good you are, you always miss something. There are ways of doing it so you don't, but they would take forever to show you on a tutorial, so we won't do that. Now, you're probably looking at this and saying, that doesn't look very realistic. Because it doesn't. It looks terribly unrealistic. One of the ways that you can do this, if you have one of the interactive displays like I do, is to be very, very pedantic. There are a whole bunch of different brushes that you can choose, ranging from this one here, which will give you, again, this is a very rough version. I don't want to say that this is the best way of doing it, because it probably isn't. You can get particular brushes for different things, and depending on how much time you're willing to spend, when you zoom out, you will start to see that it gives it a bit more of a fluffy edge. That isn't the way that you're going to do it finally. That's just to give it a little bit more of a rough edge. I'm not going to go through and try and show you all the ins and outs on how this works, because it's a multi-level staged effect. But what I am going to show you is, if we come back up to our tools, and I need to choose the right tool, I think it was this one from history. Well, that'll do. If we come to this little bar here right next to the brush and we click on that, it brings up a whole list of information of what we can change on our brushes. We have a thing which is called shape dynamics. We've got scatter. There are basically heaps and heaps of things that you can come through and adjust within your brush settings to change the way that it makes its effect. So in this case, I'm just going to click on transfer. I'm going to change the opacity so it gives you an idea of how it's going to work. We'll say we'll turn pen fade on. Sorry, pen pressure on. And we'll be able to see a bit of difference that it makes now when you're doing the effect. It has changed the amount that it is putting onto the image. Again, this is one of those things that is a rough idea here. Please don't say, yes, that looks horrible. I do understand that it's not the best way of doing it, but for tutorial's sake, I'm just trying to show you a few individual ideas. There are so many different brush settings and individual third-party stuff that you can get out there on the market. I just don't have them here at the moment because I have just freshly reinstalled Photoshop. So you can go through, that'll give you a bit of a furry look. I won't go and do it all the top because we're getting the tutorial to be too long. So we're looking at that, we're still saying that looks horrible. Yes, it does. So what we're going to do, we're going to grab this layer that we've created. I'm going to right click on it. I'm going to say duplicate layer. I'm going to change that to all good. Now, this mask that we have made, I want to imprint that onto this layer so that it is fixed and permanent and that background doesn't exist anymore. So this will effectively, let's turn off that other layer, this will effectively make this mask that we've put on this layer permanent, and it means we can do a little bit extra stuff with it and not have to worry about dealing with this mask. Because whilst this mask has been designed here, I can't physically draw anything in these areas on this layer and they'll actually be drawn on because the mask is effectively telling the computer that anything underneath that mask section on that layer isn't visible. So we're going to change that. We're going to right click on it. I'm going to say apply layer mask. And you're going to notice that our mask section has disappeared and there's now a transparent background on this image. Now you're probably wondering why I've done that. I'm going to turn this layer back on, which is the one underneath it. I'm going to come up to this move bar. First of all, I'm going to bring the layer that we've just made down underneath it. And if I move this layer up, you'll notice that it appears above the other one. What I'm going to do is turn a mask onto this layer. Again, I'm going to invert this mask. Stay with me, it does get to make sense in a moment. We're going to come to our brush tool. Again, this really depends. I'm just dealing with the brushes which are in Photoshop here. So if you get third-party ones, you're going to have probably a bit more success. So I've chosen this one which looks sort of like a grass leaf. I'm going to push X so that it changes back to my white one. I think I've done something to my brush settings. Yeah, it's just massive. That's why it's not showing up the way I wanted. That's all right. I'm going to come back up to our brush tool here. And this section here gives you an idea of the way that this is going to look. So if we click on this scatter, it's going to show you the scatter count. We don't want it to be too far. We only want it to go in one direction. But what you can see is if I increase this, that starts to look a little bit more like fur. So we're going to come to the shape dynamics. I'm going to say minimum distance. Let's see if we can increase that a little bit. Angle jitter, we'll increase that a bit more too so that it gives us a little bit more of a furry look. And that one's not really making too much of a difference. Come down to this, we go the opacity, we'll change that as well. And we'll leave it at that for the moment because that's probably enough confusion for everyone. Now, if I grab this brush here, what we're effectively doing is painting in the layer that we've just got rid of. So if I come along, and draw this like so, you can see that it is making hair. Again, this is one of those things which will take some getting used to. We can come through, we can draw it all in, depending on how effectively you want to do this. Depends on obviously how much time you want to spend. So anyway, this will give you an idea. This is just going to be very, very rough. I'll just do this very quickly. Just give it a little bit of fur around the outside. The more time you spend doing this, the better it will look. Now, I've reached the limits of this layer that we've done because all I did was grab the layer and move it up. So I'll go through, I'll add a little bit more across here. That'll be great. We'll change our brush back to a normal brush. I'm just going to go soft and decrease the size of it. And you can just come through and fill in the gaps of the bits that we've just made so that there's no empty bits. Again, depending on the brush you use, will depend on how it works. But from a distance, that looks a little bit more fluffy than it did before. We won't go into that too much more because it's going to get a little bit too confusing. What you can do from here is the bit which one of the tools which I really love because it effectively, it clones information and plants it wherever you want. Now, for this particular section, I'm going to make life a little bit easier for us, and I'm going to just merge these layers together, and I'm going to work with one layer from now on so that we know what we're dealing with. So I'm going to click on the layer I've just made and click on the other layer. I'm going to right click, I'm going to come down and say merge layers. That is all one layer now, and it has no background. So what we're dealing with now is simply this image. There is no other information in the image at the moment because we've deleted the background on this particular layer, not on the other layers, only on this layer. Now, what we were previously doing was moving a background image and then painting that in. I'm going to show you this tool here, which is called the clone tool. So if we click on that, the clone tool works by you selecting a point that you want to use. I'll just change my brush again to, oh no, we'll use this one, it'll be fun. By selecting a source point, and then the computer will clone that bit of information to wherever you say. So to make this point, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to increase the brush size. If you're on a Mac, I want you to hold the Option key, and it's going to bring up this different tool. This sets the source point of the information for the clone. So I'm going to click right there on the eye, and you'll see wherever I'm going to paint, it's going to put that point that I've started from. So we can make him a Cyclops snow leopard if we want, which is obviously not ideal, but that will just give you an idea of how the clone works. So basically, wherever you initially put the source point by holding the Option key will be the point where it takes the information from. So what we're going to do, we're going to come over here. I'm going to decrease the size of my brush. I'm going to hold the Option key, and I'm going to choose a point to draw from. And what we're going to do is just going to go in, and you can draw in a bit of an edge. Now again, if you want it to be a little bit finer, you can cross down the size of your brush, just flick through some extra little bits poking out here and there. And if you want to change the point that you're working from, say you're dealing with a dark spot, you want a bit of dark, you can choose a dark point of the fur and start again. So pretty much wherever you draw is what it's going to be there. I'll undo that because now I'm just being silly. So if you want to go through the extent, mixing and matching those kind of techniques will eventually give you good fur. It's one of those things which is going to take multiple jobs to get there, but once you do it in multiple layers. Don't try and just think you can get away with doing one individual thing. It may take 4 or 5 different techniques done on top of each other and behind each other. Use your layers, so you might have some of this being built behind and some of it being built in front of the key layer to blend them together. What we're going to do now is we're going to grab this, we're going to choose the selection, and then we're going to import a background, and we'll start to work on mixing this particular photo with the background image. So I'm going to make that another video, just so this one's a standalone on how to effectively make some fur. Like I said, this is one of those things which will take a while, but what I will show you actually whilst I'm here right now, there are going to be moments where you're going to have things like this where the whiskers and stuff have been cut off. Now, to make sure that I'm doing this properly, I'm going to choose the black layer beneath that we've got just as our temporary background. Again, I'm going to hold Command and I and invert the color. And I'm going to show you how to do something along the lines of increasing the length of the whiskers. So these tools up until this point, these colors have just been colors we've selected from the color database. What I'm going to do, I'm going to click on that and it's going to come up and it's going to show you this little selection tool which will give you the chance to choose a color from the colors within the image. So I'm going to choose that color there, which will probably be fairly close to the color of the whiskers, and you're going to see it's made the difference up here. That was the original, this is the new color. I'm going to click on OK. I'm going to come back up to my brush tool. I'm going to choose a harder version of a brush. And to do this well, you need to come to your brush settings again, which is up the top here. Okay, so we've chosen the color, and what we're going to do after we've gone through and played with these settings so that they've got something which is sort of like a fade here, we're going to choose the layer that we're on, and we're just pretty much just going to grab where we've started here and just draw it in. Now, that was a terrible, terrible effort. I'm going to decrease the size of that a bit. And they start to turn into things which look like whiskers if you do it accurately. Normally, I would suggest that you tilt your screen. I can rotate mine from the buttons on the side of my screen, which make life a little bit easier, so I can rotate it and then draw where I want. However, I can't remember, unfortunately, where the tool is within Photoshop, so you might just have to look that up. Okay, so there we have it. You can go through, you can redraw whiskers in. It's just a matter of choosing the right color, getting the brush setting, and then drawing away. What I'm going to do now is jump straight into that next video I was talking about. From there, we're going to import the background. Once we've got that in there, we'll do a few quick things to the background. We'll match the colors up a little bit. Then we're going to enter into adding the snow to give it a little bit more texture. So hopefully I'll see you in the next video, and we'll catch you again soon.